There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being alive in your own mind. Not the tiredness of a long day or a sleepless night, but something deeper. A fatigue that settles in your bones from the sheer weight of consciousness itself. You wake up, and before your eyes fully open, your mind is already 3 steps ahead, replaying yesterday's conversations, rehearsing today's interactions, predicting tomorrow's disappointments. You've learned to live with this constant companion, this voice that never stops narrating, analyzing, dissecting every moment as it unfolds, while others seem to glide through life with an inviolable lightness. You carry an invisible library of observations, a mental archive of every micro-expression, every tonal shift, every unspoken truth that hangs in the air like smoke. People call you thoughtful, insightful, wise beyond your years. They don't see the cost of that wisdom. They don't know that you can't watch a movie without deconstructing its themes, can't have a simple conversation without tracking the subtext, can't fall in love without cataloging every variable that might lead to its ending. Nothing is ever just what it is. Everything must be understood, contextualized, filed away for future reference. You weren't always this way, or perhaps you were, but there was a time before you became aware of your awareness, before the mind turned inward and discovered it could watch itself thinking. Some call it consciousness. Others call it curse. You've stopped trying to name it. What you know now is that you experience life on multiple channels simultaneously. There's the surface level, where you smile and nod and participate in the choreography of normal human interaction. Then there's the layer beneath, where you're monitoring your own performance, noting the slight hesitation in your voice, wondering if you're being authentic or just playing a role you've perfected over years of careful observation. And beneath that, another layer, still the one that questions whether authenticity even exists, or if we're all just performing versions of ourselves we've convinced ourselves are real. It's exhausting, this recursive loop of self-examination. You think, and then you think about thinking, and then you analyze why you're analyzing, until the original thought has dissolved into a maze of metacognition. The neuroscience is clear on this. Your brain, that 3-pound universe between your ears, processes information differently. The default mode network, that constellation of brain regions responsible for introspection and self-referential thought, hums with activity even when you're supposed to be at rest. For most people, this network quiets during focused tasks. For you, it never fully switches off. Research from cognitive neuroscience labs shows that individuals with high-trait rumination exhibit increased connectivity between the default mode network and regions associated with emotional processing. Your brain isn't just thinking, it's feeling its thoughts, creating an intricate feedback loop where cognition and emotion blur into something that feels overwhelming and inescapable. But the wiring is only part of the story, because somewhere in the archaeology of your past, there are reasons why your mind learned to work this way. There's a particular kind of childhood that creates a particular kind of adult. You might not have the language for it when you're young, but you develop a sixth sense for emotional weather patterns. You learn to read the room before you can read a book. You become fluent in the silent language of tension, the vocabulary of sighs and slam doors and conversations that stop abruptly when you enter. Maybe your home was a place where love was conditional, where safety depended on your ability to anticipate and adapt. Maybe your parents weren't cruel, just unpredictable. Their moods shifted like seasons, and you became a meteorologist of emotion, constantly scanning the horizon for storms. Or perhaps it was subtler than that. Perhaps you grew up in a home where feelings were never named, where everyone smiled through their pain and pretended everything was fine. In that silence, you learned to become a translator, to decode what people meant from what they didn't say. You became the emotional archaeologist of your family, excavating truth from layers of unspoken hurt. Attachment theory gives us a framework for understanding this. John Bowlby's research, expanded by Mary Ainsworth and countless others, shows us that children develop internal working models of relationships based on their early experiences with caregivers. When that care is inconsistent or emotionally unavailable, the child's nervous system adapts. It becomes hypervigilant, always scanning for signs of rejection or abandonment. But here's what the textbooks don't fully capture: the lived experience of that adaptation. You don't just develop anxiety. You develop a kind of precocious wisdom and ability to see through people's defenses because you had to decode your own parents to survive. You become the friend everyone confides in, the one who understands, who can articulate feelings they can't name themselves. And in that role, you find purpose, you find worth. You learn that your value lies in your ability to see clearly, to understand deeply, to carry other people's emotional complexity with grace. It becomes your identity, the perceptive one, the deep one, the one who gets it. But identity is a double-edged gift, because once you've built your sense of self around depth and understanding, you can't turn it off, even when it hurts. Even when you desperately want to be shallow, to live on the surface, to stop caring so much about everything. You carry this into adulthood, this finely tuned instrument of perception, and for a while it serves you well. You excel in fields that require insight. You build relationships based on profound understanding. People are drawn to your ability to see them, really see them, in ways they've never been seen before. But somewhere along the way, the gift begins to feel like a burden, because you can't unsee what you see. You can't unknow what you know. You notice the small betrayals in long friendships, the slow erosion of passion in relationships, the way people's words and actions diverge when they think no one's watching. And once you notice, you can't pretend you haven't. Your mind becomes a courtroom where you're simultaneously the prosecutor, the defense, and the judge. You present evidence of someone's character flaws, then immediately argue for compassion based on their history. You convict and absolve in the same breath, leaving yourself in a state of perpetual ambivalence. This is what psychologists call cognitive complexity, the ability to hold multiple, sometimes contradictory perspectives simultaneously. It's correlated with intelligence, with emotional maturity, with wisdom. It's also correlated with depression, with anxiety, with a profound sense of alienation, because when you can see all sides of everything, decision-making becomes paralysis. When you understand everyone's motivations, forgiveness becomes complicated. When you can predict how most situations will unfold, hope becomes hard to sustain. You start to notice patterns that others miss. The way new relationships follow the same arc as old ones. The way your own behaviors repeat despite your awareness. The way society perpetuates the same cycles of harm generation after generation, and everyone just continues, as if awareness alone could change anything. This is the cruel paradox at the heart of deep thinking. The more you understand, the less agency you feel. The more clearly you see the mechanisms of your own psychology, the more trapped you feel by them. You become the scientist observing your own experiment, unable to intervene without contaminating the results. There's a concept in Eastern philosophy called the gateless gate. It's a Zen koan that points to a fundamental paradox. You must pass through a gate that doesn't exist. For the overthinking mind, this feels like a perfect metaphor. You're searching for a way out of your own awareness, but the searcher is the prison. Western psychology has its own version of this insight. Ironic process theory, developed by Daniel Wegner, demonstrates that trying not to think about something actually makes you think about it more. Tell yourself not to think about a white bear, and suddenly your mind is full of white bears. Tell yourself to stop overthinking, and you're overthinking about overthinking. The mind is a maze that builds new walls every time you find a path through. You read books on mindfulness, on cognitive behavioral therapy, on acceptance and commitment therapy. You learn the techniques. You understand the theory. You can explain to others exactly how to find peace, but knowing the map isn't the same as traveling the territory. You've tried meditation. You've sat in silence, watching your thoughts arise and pass away like clouds, and for moments, glorious moments, you touch something deeper. A stillness beneath the noise, a space of pure awareness that doesn't need to analyze or understand. It's there, real, undeniable. But then the meditation ends, you open your eyes, and within minutes, sometimes seconds, the mind reasserts itself. The thoughts return like a tide you can't hold back. And now you're not just thinking. You're thinking about why you can't maintain the peace you just experienced. You're analyzing your inability to be present. You're overthinking about overthinking. This is where many people give up. They decide that peace isn't for them. that their mind is too active, too complex, too broken to ever rest. They resign themselves to a life of constant mental motion, convincing themselves that at least they're productive with their suffering, that all this thinking must be producing something of value. But resignation is just another form of resistance, another strategy the mind uses to avoid the one thing it fears most: surrender. Surrender doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean becoming intellectually lazy or emotionally numb. Surrender means something far more radical and far more difficult. It means letting reality be what it is without needing to improve it with your understanding. This is where the healing actually begins. Not in thinking better thoughts, but in changing your relationship to thinking itself. Not in solving the problem of your mind, but in recognizing that your mind was never a problem to begin with. It's a tool. A beautiful, sophisticated, incredibly powerful tool. But you are not the tool. You are the one who uses it. Neuroscience is beginning to catch up with what contemplatives have known for millennia. Studies using fMRI technology show that experienced meditators develop increased activity in the posterior cingulate cortex, a region associated with self-awareness and the ability to disengage from automatic thought patterns. They're not thinking less. They're relating to their thoughts differently. Lisa Feldman Barrett's work on constructed emotions shows us that our feelings aren't reactions to the world. They're predictions our brain makes based on past experience. Your anxiety isn't caused by the present moment. It's your brain's best guess about what the present moment means, based on a lifetime of data. Once you understand this, truly understand it in your bones, the thoughts lose some of their power. They're still there. You still notice everything. You still analyze and connect and see patterns. But there's space around it now, a kind of breathing room that wasn't there before. You begin to recognize the difference between thinking and being lost in thought, between observation and obsession, between awareness and identification. This is the practice, not of stopping thoughts, but of watching them without climbing inside. You notice the thought, "I'm not enough," arise, and instead of believing it or arguing with it or trying to replace it with a positive affirmation, you simply note, "There's that thought again. Interesting." You become a naturalist observing the wildlife of your own mind, curious but not captured. The world won't make this easy for you. We live in an age of manufactured urgency, where every notification is designed to hijack your attention, where productivity is valorized above presence, where depth is sacrificed for speed. The modern attention economy doesn't just compete for your focus, it actively rewards fragmentation, distraction, the constant splitting of awareness into smaller and smaller pieces. For a mind like yours, this is particularly cruel. You're already overstimulated by existence itself. Add to that the relentless barrage of information, opinion, outrage, and entertainment, and your nervous system never gets a chance to regulate. You're running cognitive and emotional processes that would have challenged someone from a century ago for maybe a few hours a week. You're running them constantly, from the moment you wake until sleep finally claims you. The research on digital technology and mental health grows more concerning each year. Studies show that constant context switching, the ping-ponging between tasks and stimuli that characterizes modern life, doesn't just reduce productivity. It fundamentally alters how the brain processes information. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and emotional regulation, becomes chronically overtaxed. The result is decision fatigue, reduced impulse control, and a baseline state of low-grade anxiety that feels like your new normal. But here's what's rarely discussed: in a world optimized for distraction, your depth becomes a form of resistance. Your refusal to live on the surface, even when the surface seems easier, is an act of defiance. Every moment you choose to feel fully, to think deeply, to engage authentically rather than algorithmically, you're reclaiming your humanity from systems designed to commodify it. This doesn't make it easier. In fact, it often makes it harder, because you're swimming against a current that most people don't even notice. You're speaking a language that fewer and fewer people understand. You crave conversations about meaning in a culture that traffics in memes. You want connection in an age of performance. You seek truth in an era of curated authenticity. And so you learn to code switch, to translate your depth into digestible pieces, to hide the complexity of your inner world behind a socially acceptable facade. You master the art of seeming normal while feeling completely alien. And the isolation of that performance, the exhaustion of constantly translating yourself into a language others can understand, becomes another weight you carry in silence. There's a concept in psychology called empathy fatigue, though that phrase doesn't quite capture the fullness of what you experience. It's not just that you tire of feeling others' emotions. It's that you can't help but absorb them. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish clearly between your distress and theirs. Mirror neurons, those remarkable cells that fire both when we act and when we observe others acting, create the neurological basis for empathy. But in highly sensitive individuals, this mirroring can become overwhelming. You walk into a room and immediately sense the emotional temperature. You read micro-expressions, vocal tones, body language with the precision of someone who learned early that survival depended on it. This isn't a superpower, though people often frame it that way when they want you to help them process their feelings. It's more like having one fewer layer of skin than everyone else. You're constantly taking in information that others filter out automatically. Every interaction leaves a residue. Every conversation becomes an exchange, not just of words, but of emotional energy. And because you understand this, because you can name it and explain it, people assume you've solved it. They think awareness equals immunity. But knowing you're an empath doesn't stop you from absorbing others' pain. Understanding the mechanics of compassion fatigue doesn't prevent you from burning out. If anything, the awareness sometimes makes it worse, because now you're also carrying the meta-emotion of knowing you should protect yourself better, but not knowing how without becoming someone you're not. The truth is, there's no easy answer here. You can't unsee what you see. You can't unfeel what you feel. You can set boundaries, and you should. You can learn to distinguish between empathy and enmeshment. You can practice grounding techniques and self-compassion and all the tools that genuinely help. But you'll never be someone who skims the surface of life. That ship sailed a long time ago, probably before you even knew there was a choice. So the question becomes not how to feel less, but how to carry what you feel without being crushed by it. How to be deeply sensitive without being perpetually overwhelmed. How to love the world without letting the world's suffering destroy you. This is where the real work begins. Not in understanding yourself better. You've done that work 1,000 times. Not in analyzing your patterns or tracing your trauma to its roots. You could write a dissertation on your own psychology. The work is in learning to live skillfully with who you are, not who you think you should be. It starts with a kind of radical acceptance that feels almost like betrayal at first. You have to stop fighting your own nature. Stop treating your sensitivity like a flaw to overcome. Stop apologizing for your depth or trying to package it in ways that make others comfortable. This doesn't mean being reckless with your energy or abandoning all boundaries. It means ending the war with yourself. Because here's what all that internal conflict was costing you. Every moment spent wishing you were different is a moment not spent living as yourself. Every ounce of energy directed at self-improvement is energy you can't use for actual living. The exhaustion you feel isn't just from thinking too much. It's from the constant effort of trying to be other than you are. There's profound relief in finally dropping that burden. In saying, this is how my mind works. This is how deeply I feel. This is the level of awareness I bring to everything. And it's okay. Not okay as in perfect. Not okay as in easy, but okay as in acceptable, as in enough, as in real. From this place of acceptance, something unexpected becomes possible. You start to see that the same qualities that brought you so much pain also gave you gifts. Your hypervigilance became intuition. Your analysis became wisdom. Your sensitivity became the capacity for profound beauty and connection. You suffered for these things, yes. But you also experienced dimensions of life that many people never touch. You've sat with friends in their darkest moments and helped them find words for nameless pain. You've created art or writing or insights that came directly from your willingness to feel everything fully. You've loved with an intensity that even when it ended badly was worth experiencing. You've thought thoughts and made connections and understood truths that only emerge in the depths. None of this erases the difficulty, but it changes the story from I am broken and need fixing to I am different. And that difference has both costs and gifts. That shift, subtle as it sounds, changes everything. Here's what no one tells you about getting older with a mind like yours. The overthinking doesn't stop. The sensitivity doesn't diminish. If anything, as you accumulate more experiences, your brain has more data to process, more patterns to recognize, more connections to make. The complexity only increases. But something else happens too. You develop a kind of friendly detachment from your own drama. You've watched your mind spiral enough times to recognize the patterns. You've catastrophized about situations that turned out fine and prepared for disasters that never came. You've spent countless hours in scenarios that existed only in your imagination. And gradually you learn to take your thoughts a little less seriously, not because they're not important, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've seen the movie enough times to know how it ends. The anxious thoughts will come. They'll feel urgent and true and all-consuming. And then they'll pass. And life will continue, and you'll be okay, not because the thoughts were wrong, but because you're more than your thoughts. This is what spiritual teachers mean when they talk about witnessing consciousness. It's not some mystical state reserved for monks and mystics. It's the ordinary, extraordinary realization that you can observe your mind without being controlled by it. You can watch the storm of thoughts and emotions without drowning in it. You can hold your human complexity with the same compassion you'd offer a close friend. Research in metacognition shows that the ability to think about thinking, to observe your own mental processes, is actually a form of cognitive flexibility. When developed skillfully, it becomes a buffer against rumination and anxiety. You're not trying to change the content of your thoughts. You're changing your relationship to the fact of thinking itself, and this is where the practice becomes genuinely transformative. Not through effort or control, but through a kind of gentle, persistent attention. You begin to notice the space between thoughts, the brief silence before the mind generates the next concern. That space was always there. You just never noticed it because you were too busy attending to the content. But once you start to see it, that space becomes a refuge, not an escape from your mind, but a reminder that you're larger than any single thought or emotion. You contain multitudes, yes, but you also contain silence. And in that silence there's a quality of peace that doesn't depend on circumstances or understanding or having everything figured out. There's a particular kind of wisdom that emerges only through suffering, only through being broken open by your own depth. You can't think your way to it or read your way to it or have it explained to you, though all of those can point the direction. You have to live it. You have to descend into your own underworld and meet what you find there with open eyes. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, the integration of the shadow, the reconciliation of opposites into a more complete whole. But these are just words until you experience the actual journey, until you've sat with the parts of yourself you've tried to disown, until you've made peace with the rage and fear and shame that live beneath your careful thinking. For the overthinking mind, this journey often requires embracing the irrational. You've spent so much time in your head, so many years trying to logic your way through emotional realities, that the idea of simply feeling without understanding feels dangerous, foolish even. But there's knowledge that exists below the level of thought. There's wisdom in the body that the mind can't access through analysis. This is why therapy works when it works, not because the therapist gives you new information. You could probably out-analyze most therapists if you wanted to, but because the relationship itself, the experience of being fully seen without having to perform or explain or justify, creates a new emotional reality. The nervous system learns, slowly, that it's safe to relax, that not every silence needs to be filled, that you can be loved without earning it through insight or understanding. And this learning happens beneath language, in the limbic system, in the parts of the brain that formed before you had words. No amount of thinking can reach those parts directly. You have to use different tools: somatic work, movement, art, music, touch, anything that bypasses the mind and speaks directly to the body's ancient wisdom. You might resist this at first. Your mind is your stronghold, your identity, your primary way of making sense of the world. Trusting anything else feels like betrayal. But slowly, with practice, you learn that thinking is one way of knowing, not the only way. That sometimes the body knows what the mind is still trying to figure out. That intuition isn't the enemy of rationality, but its complement. We need to talk about something rarely acknowledged in discussions of overthinking and depth. The loneliness, the specific, aching isolation of being someone whose inner world is so rich and complex that very few people can meet you there. You've learned to hide it well. You've mastered the art of connection at various levels, surface friendships that serve their purpose, deeper relationships where you can be more of yourself, and perhaps one or two people in your entire life who you can be completely unfiltered with. But even with them, even in the closest relationships, there's often a part of you that remains untranslatable. It's not that others don't care. It's not that they're shallow or uninterested. It's that your mind works at a speed and depth that's exhausting to keep up with. You make connections between ideas that seem obvious to you but are leaps for others. You feel the weight of implications that others don't see. You carry context and nuance and multiple perspectives simultaneously, and most conversations feel like you're translating your full thought into a simplified version just to make it digestible. And so you've learned to be alone in crowds, to feel the peculiar isolation of being surrounded by people who like you, maybe even love you, but don't quite get you. They see the version you show them, the edited, accessible version, and it's real. It's part of you, but it's not the whole truth. This loneliness is part of the cost of consciousness. Philosophers have grappled with it for millennia. Nietzsche wrote about it. Kierkegaard anguished over it. The more awake you become, the fewer people can understand your experience, not because they're less than you, but because they're different from you. They live in different depths, swim in different currents. But here's the paradox that offers some solace. When you stop trying to bridge that gap, when you accept that you'll be lonely sometimes, the loneliness itself becomes less heavy. You stop resenting others for not understanding. You stop exhausting yourself trying to translate. You learn to appreciate connection at whatever level it's available, while also cultivating a relationship with your own solitude. Because solitude, when you stop running from it, can become sacred. It's the space where your mind can fully stretch, where you don't have to modify or explain or translate, where you can think your strange thoughts and feel your complex feelings without managing anyone else's reaction to them. Loneliness is suffering. Solitude is freedom. They're not the same thing, even though they look similar from the outside. Something shifts when you reach a certain point in this journey. You can't pinpoint exactly when it happens. There's no single moment of enlightenment, no dramatic transformation, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, the relationship changes. The thinking doesn't stop, but you stop believing it so completely. The feelings don't diminish, but you stop drowning in them. You begin to understand, not intellectually but experientially, that you are not your thoughts. This sounds like spiritual cliché until it becomes lived reality. You watch a thought arise, I'm not good enough. And instead of spiraling into all the evidence for and against this claim, instead of analyzing why you think this or where it came from, you simply notice there's that thought again. And in that noticing, there's space. The thought has no more inherent truth than a cloud has solidity. It's a pattern of neural firing, a habit of mind, a story you've told yourself so many times it feels like fact. But it's not fact, it's just a thought. And thoughts, you finally understand, are not commands. They're not prophecies. They're not even particularly accurate descriptions of reality. They're just thoughts, weather patterns in the mind, sometimes stormy, sometimes clear, always changing. This recognition doesn't eliminate suffering, but it transforms your relationship to it. You can be in pain without making the pain mean something catastrophic about you or your life. You can be anxious without needing the anxiety to resolve before you can move forward. You can overthink without identifying as an overthinker with all the limitations that label implies. Acceptance and commitment therapy cause this diffusion, the process of separating from thoughts rather than being fused with them. But the word doesn't capture the relief of it, the lightness that comes when you realize you don't have to believe everything you think, that your mind can generate whatever chaos it wants, and you can acknowledge it without obeying it. You start to make different choices, not because you've overcome your nature, but because you're no longer imprisoned by it. You feel the anxiety about the social event, notice all the thoughts about why it will be terrible, and go anyway, not to prove something, not to conquer the anxiety, but because you've learned to act based on your values rather than your feelings. And slowly, incrementally, this creates a different life. Not a perfect life. Not a life free from overthinking or pain, but a life where those things don't have veto power. Where you can carry your complexity and still move forward. Where you can be exactly who you are, in all your depth and sensitivity and impossible overthinking. Still participate fully in the messy, beautiful, painful, extraordinary experience of being human. Let me tell you what freedom looks like for a mind like yours. It's not the absence of thought. It's not finally becoming someone who lives simply and thinks shallowly and doesn't feel so much. That person you will never be. And thank God for that. Freedom is thinking all the thoughts and feeling all the feelings and noticing all the patterns, and then choosing what to do anyway. It's carrying your depth without letting it define your limits. It's honoring your sensitivity without becoming its victim. It's using your incredible mind as the tool it is rather than letting it use you. Freedom is being able to say, yes, my mind is showing me 17 reasons why this will end badly, and I'm going to try it anyway. It's recognizing the difference between wisdom and fear, between intuition and trauma, between genuine insight and the mind's desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable. Freedom is laughing at your own mental gymnastics, catching yourself in a recursive loop of meta-analysis and thinking, there I go again, with affection rather than judgment. It's developing a friendly relationship with your own complexity, the way you might with an old friend whose quirks you've learned to love. You will still overthink, you will still feel everything deeply, you will still notice things others miss and carry meanings they never feel. But you'll hold it all more lightly. You'll know that your thoughts aren't facts, your feelings aren't commands, and your depth, while real and valuable, is just one part of who you are. The rest of you, the part that exists before thought and beneath thought and beyond thought, has always been free. It's been there all along, quiet and patient, waiting for you to stop trying to think your way to it and simply recognize it. That awareness that watches the overthinking, that consciousness that contains but is not contained by the thoughts, that essential you that remains untouched even by your most turbulent mental storms. This is what all the philosophy and psychology and neuroscience has been pointing toward. Not a technique or a trick or a better way of thinking, but the recognition of what you already are beneath all the thinking, whole, complete, enough, always have been, always will be. The journey of the overthinker is ultimately a journey home, not to a place you've never been, but to a recognition you've somehow forgotten. You are not the storm of thoughts. You are the sky that contains them. You are not the waves of emotion. You are the ocean that remains itself regardless of the surface turbulence. Every tradition, every wisdom system, every genuine teacher throughout history has pointed to this same truth in different languages. The Buddhists call it original mind. The mystics call it the soul. The neuroscientists call it pure awareness. The name doesn't matter. The recognition does, and you don't reach this recognition by thinking more clearly or understanding more deeply, though both have their place. You reach it by finally allowing yourself to rest. Not the rest of sleep or vacation, but the rest that comes from putting down the burden of trying to figure everything out. The rest that comes from accepting that some questions don't have answers, some problems don't have solutions, and some mysteries are meant to be lived rather than solved. Your mind will continue doing what minds do, thinking, analyzing, connecting, questioning. This is its nature, and there's beauty in that. But you, the awareness reading these words right now, are not reducible to mental activity. You are the spaciousness in which all of it arises and passes away. When you truly understand this, not as a concept, but as lived reality, everything changes. And nothing changes. You still live your life, face your challenges, feel your feelings, think your thoughts, but you do so with a fundamental ease that wasn't there before. A groundedness in something that can't be touched by the chaos of the mind. This is the gift hidden in the curse of overthinking. The very quality that led you so deep into suffering is the same quality that can lead you to liberation. Your capacity for awareness, turned inward, reveals the truth that has always been true. You are already what you've been seeking. You are already whole. You are already free. The overthinking mind brought you to this recognition, and now, finally, you can let it rest. You were never the problem. You were always the answer, waiting to be discovered beneath the noise.